Stop everything right now because what just got exposed is one of the most egregious violations of separation of powers in modern American history. Attorney General Pam Bondi was literally caught red-handed at a congressional hearing with printed surveillance records showing exactly which Epstein files Democratic Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal searched, and this scandal has exploded into bipartisan outrage that's threatening Bondi's entire tenure. Number 1. Photographers captured Bondi holding a document titled Jayapal Pramila Search History that listed every single Epstein file the Congresswoman reviewed, proving the DOJ was actively surveilling members of Congress conducting oversight. Number 2. Even Republican Speaker Mike Johnson is calling this inappropriate and saying the DOJ crossed a line, while Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries said there is no bottom for the Trump administration and this violates the principles of separate and co-equal branches of government. And number 3, Jayapal says she had DOJ employees literally sitting behind her, watching what she searched in real time, and she's now demanding an investigation into what she's calling a clandestine congressional surveillance operation. Right now, 3 senior Democrats have sent a letter to Bondi demanding she immediately cease tracking members' reviews and develop a completely new protocol, but based on Bondi's combative testimony this week, she's showing no signs of backing down. This is unprecedented, this is unconstitutional, and you need to understand exactly what happened because it gets absolutely insane. Stay with me. Let me walk you through what happened on Wednesday, February 11th, because this is where the scandal broke wide open. Attorney General Pam Bondi appeared before the House Judiciary Committee for what was supposed to be an oversight hearing about the Department of Justice, but it quickly turned into an explosive confrontation over the DOJ's handling of the Epstein files. Bondi was being grilled by Democrats about why the department delayed releasing documents, why certain powerful people's names were redacted while victims' information was exposed, and why no co-conspirators of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have been indicted. But during the hearing, something caught the eye of photographers in the room. Reuters and Agence France-Presse photographers snapped pictures of Bondi's notes, and in her black binder was a document that made jaws drop. The page was clearly labeled at the top Jayapal Pramila Search History, and underneath was a detailed list of Epstein files with their file numbers and brief descriptions of their contents. CNN was the first to report on this, and when they contacted Congresswoman Jayapal for comment, she told them she had no idea the Justice Department had surveilled her search history until CNN showed her the photos. Jayapal immediately came out swinging. She posted on X, and I'm quoting directly, "It is totally inappropriate and against the separation of powers for the DOJ to surveil us as we search the Epstein files." She said Bondi showed up today with a burn book that held a printed search history of exactly what emails I searched. That is outrageous, and I intend to pursue this and stop this spying on members. Now let me explain the context of how this surveillance even happened, because the setup is almost as outrageous as the spying itself. The DOJ began allowing members of Congress to view unredacted versions of the Epstein files this week, but they didn't just hand over the documents. Instead, lawmakers were required to travel to a DOJ annex building in Washington. They had to schedule specific time slots. They were allowed to bring 0 staff members to help them. They couldn't bring their phones into the building, and they were limited to using one of only 4 DOJ-controlled computers that had been set up with special software to access the files. And get this, when lawmakers arrived, DOJ employees logged them into the computers using personalized logins with their names attached. Representative Suhas Subramaniam, a Democrat from Virginia, described the scene as 4 computers set up in a really tiny room with a unique login and password for each member of Congress. Jayapal told reporters that for much of the time there were DOJ employees who were looking. I had somebody sitting right behind me for a lot of the time looking at exactly what I was searching. She said they had logins that had our names. They logged us into the computers, so clearly they intended to look at our search history even when they invited us in. Think about how deliberate this setup was. The DOJ created a surveillance system where every single keystroke, every file opened, every search query made by members of Congress was being logged, tracked, and recorded, and then Bondi brought that surveillance data with her to the hearing to use as opposition research against the lawmakers who were questioning her. Ranking member Jamie Raskin said Bondi came prepared with a burn book full of information on Democrats, with what he called flashcards with insults designed to embarrass members during their questioning. And here's where it gets even more suspicious. Jayapal raised a really important question in her interview with MS Now. She asked, "Is this the whole reason they opened the files up to us 2 days early, so they could essentially survey members to see what we were going to ask her about?" Think about the timeline. The DOJ suddenly granted access to unredacted files just days before Bondi's scheduled testimony. Members rushed over to review documents. The DOJ tracked every single search. And then Bondi showed up armed with detailed notes about exactly what each member had looked at so she could prepare her responses and counterattacks. At the hearing itself, this surveillance information was clearly being used. When Jayapal questioned Bondi about two specific documents that appeared on the search history list, Bondi had responses ready. One of the files was an email exchange between Epstein and a high-profile Emirati sultan whose email address was blacked out, and another was an email with the subject line Epstein victim list that named dozens of people with few redactions and has since been removed from the public database. Jayapal pressed Bondi to apologize to Epstein survivors for failing to shield their personal information, and Bondi deflected and attacked, clearly prepared for these exact questions because she knew in advance what Jayapal had been researching. Now, the DOJ's defense of this surveillance is laughable. A DOJ spokesperson put out a statement saying DOJ has extended Congress the opportunity to review unredacted documents in the Epstein files, and as a part of that review, the DOJ logs all searches made on its systems to protect against the release of victim information. But that defense falls apart immediately. If the purpose was to protect victim information, why was Bondi using the surveillance data to prepare opposition research for a congressional hearing? Why wasn't this logging system explained to members before they started searching? And why were DOJ employees physically watching over members' shoulders as they reviewed documents? The reaction from Congress has been swift and bipartisan, which is remarkable given how divided Washington is right now. House Speaker Mike Johnson, who is usually one of Trump's most loyal defenders, broke with the administration on this. When asked by MS Now if Bondi's action was appropriate, Johnson initially tried to dodge, saying, "I'm not going to comment on an allegation that is unsubstantiated. I don't know anything about it." But then he added, "I haven't seen or heard anything about that, but that would be inappropriate if it happened." After Jayapal called Johnson directly on Wednesday night to confirm that yes, this absolutely happened, and yes, those were her exact searches in the exact order she made them, Johnson's tone shifted. On Thursday, he told reporters, "My understanding is that there are computers set up where the DOJ was allowing access to the files, and I think members should obviously have the right to peruse those at their own speed and with their own discretion, and I don't think it's appropriate for anybody to be tracking that." He even said he would echo that concern to anybody involved with DOJ, though he speculated it was probably just an oversight. But here's the thing. This was not an oversight. This was a deliberate surveillance operation. Representative Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky who's been at the forefront of pushing for Epstein file transparency, said the most charitable explanation for tracking members' search history would be if the DOJ wanted to improve their service by helping members find frequently sought documents. But Massie said that charitable view is completely undercut by the fact that Bondi carried a list of Jayapal's search terms to the hearing, where she clearly was prepared with opposition research and brought flashcards with insults to try to embarrass the members. Democratic leaders have been even more forceful in their condemnation. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries held a press conference Thursday where he said, "There is no bottom for the Trump administration. It's a disgrace. It does violate the principles of separate and co-equal branches of government." Ranking member Jamie Raskin released a blistering statement saying, "Not only has the Department of Justice illegally withheld documents from Congress and the American people, not only has Attorney General Bondi failed to bring a single indictment against a single co-conspirator of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, but now Bondi and her team are spying on members of Congress, conducting oversight in yet another blatant attempt to intrude into Congress's oversight processes." On Thursday, February 13th, three senior Democrats, Jamie Raskin, Pramila Jayapal, and Robert Garcia, who's the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee, sent a formal letter to Bondi making several explosive demands. First, they demanded that the DOJ immediately cease tracking members' review of the Epstein files. Second, they demanded a meeting with Bondi by February 20th to develop a new protocol that allows members to meaningfully review fully unredacted documents without surveillance. Third, they demanded the release of the roughly 3 million Epstein documents the DOJ has withheld from public view. But the letter goes even further. The lawmakers are demanding a full accounting of what they described as a clandestine congressional surveillance operation. They want a complete list of all members of Congress whose searches were tracked. They want an explanation of why the DOJ was collecting this information. They want details on how the data was gathered and stored. And they ask the crucial question, what information, in addition to the searches, are you collecting on members of Congress? Are they tracking how long members spend on certain documents? Are they monitoring which files members return to multiple times? Are they analyzing patterns in members' research? The possibilities for abuse are endless. Let's talk about why this matters so much, because this goes way beyond just the Epstein files. This is a fundamental violation of the constitutional separation of powers. Article 1 of the Constitution establishes Congress as a separate and co-equal branch of government with the power to conduct oversight of the executive branch. That oversight function is critical to our system of checks and balances. Congress is supposed to be able to investigate the executive branch, request documents, review evidence, and hold hearings without fear that the executive branch will retaliate or surveil them. What the DOJ did here is create a chilling effect on congressional oversight. If members of Congress know that the executive branch is tracking their research, logging their searches, and using that information against them, how can they effectively conduct oversight? Members might avoid searching for certain documents because they don't want the administration to know what they're investigating. They might hold back on certain lines of questioning because they fear retaliation. This fundamentally undermines Congress's ability to hold the executive branch accountable. And let's be clear about what the Epstein files represent. These are documents related to one of the most notorious sex trafficking operations in American history. Jeffrey Epstein trafficked underage girls to powerful men for decades. He had connections to presidents, princes, billionaires, scientists, and politicians. After his death and Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction, the public has a right to know who else was involved, who knew what was happening, and whether any co-conspirators are still walking free. Congress passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act requiring all government documents related to Epstein to be released by December 19, 2025. The DOJ missed that deadline. They've only released about 3 million pages while withholding millions more. The documents they did release have been heavily redacted with names of powerful people blacked out while victims' names and photos were left exposed. It's a complete disaster, and Congress has every right to demand accountability. But instead of cooperating with congressional oversight, Bondi and the DOJ are actively obstructing it. They're making it as difficult as possible for members to review documents by limiting access to 4 computers in a tiny room with no staff assistance. They're surveilling members' searches. They're using that surveillance data to prepare for hostile questioning, and they're refusing to apologize or change course. During Wednesday's hearing, Bondi was combative, dismissive, and at times openly hostile to Democratic members. When Jayapal pressed her on the mishandling of victim information, Bondi deflected and changed the subject to talk about how high the stock market is. When Raskin tried to ask about redactions protecting powerful people, Bondi accused him of playing politics. At multiple points, the hearing devolved into shouting matches, with Bondi and Democratic members talking over each other. And here's what makes this even more outrageous. Bondi is supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. The Attorney General is supposed to uphold the rule of law, respect constitutional principles, and ensure that the Justice Department operates with integrity. But Bondi is treating her position like she's Trump's personal lawyer and attack dog. She's using DOJ resources to conduct political opposition research on members of Congress. She's obstructing transparency efforts. She's showing contempt for congressional oversight. Legal experts are horrified by what's happening. Stanford law professor Nate Persily, who's been following the Epstein files situation closely, told reporters that using DOJ surveillance capabilities to monitor congressional oversight activities represents a dangerous precedent. He said, "This isn't about protecting victim information, as the DOJ claims, because if that were the goal, you'd notify members of the monitoring and explain the safeguards. Instead, this was done covertly and then weaponized against members during testimony. The practical implications are also insane. With only 4 computers available and millions of documents to review, Jayapal's office calculated that it would take more than 7 years for all 435 members of the House to review the partially released files, let alone the millions more pages that remain fully withheld. This isn't meaningful access. This is obstruction disguised as cooperation." And let's talk about what members actually found when they did get access to unredacted files. Representative Ro Khanna, a Democrat from California, said he saw an unredacted file that mentioned a politician who emailed Epstein, and he's demanding the DOJ unmask that name. Thomas Massey said after reviewing unredacted files that there's information being kept from the public that shouldn't be. The implication is that powerful people are being protected while the public is being kept in the dark. Jayapal told NPR that after speaking with Speaker Johnson, "I do think that there is bipartisan agreement that we should be able to review those files without the Department of Justice surveilling us." She's pushing for a completely different process where members can access documents without DOJ monitoring, without having to travel to a specific location, and without restrictions on bringing staff or taking adequate notes. So, what happens next? Based on Bondi's extremely hostile posture at the hearing, Democrats are not expecting cooperation. Raskin said in his letter, "If Bondi's behavior this week is any indication, we're going to have to fight for every inch of transparency. The lawmakers are prepared to use every tool at their disposal, including subpoenas, contempt referrals, and potentially even articles of impeachment if Bondi continues to obstruct oversight." Republicans are in a difficult position. Many of them, including Massey, genuinely care about Epstein transparency and have pushed for file releases, but they're also reluctant to go to war with a Trump cabinet member. Johnson's comments show he's trying to thread the needle, expressing concern about the surveillance while downplaying it as probably an oversight rather than a deliberate abuse of power. But this wasn't an oversight. The DOJ created a surveillance system with personalized logins for each member. They tracked searches in real time. They printed out those searches and gave them to the Attorney General to use as prep material for a hearing. And when they got caught, instead of apologizing, they doubled down with a weak excuse about protecting victim information that nobody believes. The American people should be outraged about this. Whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether you support Trump or oppose him, this should alarm you. The executive branch should not be surveilling the legislative branch. The Attorney General should not be using DOJ resources to conduct opposition research on members of Congress. And transparency about Epstein's co-conspirators should not be this difficult to achieve. Survivors of Epstein's trafficking are watching all of this and seeing that the government is more interested in protecting powerful people and attacking congressional investigators than in delivering justice. Jayapal stood with Epstein survivors outside the Capitol after the hearing, and their message was clear. They want full transparency, they want accountability, and they want to know why no one besides Ghislaine Maxwell has been charged. This scandal is just getting started. As more members of Congress review the files and discover what information the DOJ tracked about their searches, expect more revelations. As journalists dig deeper into the DOJ's surveillance capabilities and how they're being used, expect more outrage. And as the deadline approaches for Bondi to respond to the congressional letter, expect a major confrontation. This is about more than just the Epstein files. This is about whether we have a functioning system of checks and balances or whether the executive branch can surveil, intimidate, and obstruct the legislative branch with impunity. This is about whether the Attorney General serves the American people and the Constitution or whether she serves as Trump's personal enforcer. And this is about whether we'll ever get the full truth about who else was involved in Jeffrey Epstein's crimes. Share this video because people need to know what's happening. The mainstream media is covering this, but they're not explaining the full constitutional implications. Contact your representatives and demand they support efforts to get full transparency on the Epstein files and end DOJ surveillance of Congress. And stay informed because this story is developing every single day. Subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon, and I'll keep you updated on every twist and turn. This is one of the biggest scandals of 2026, and we're just scratching the surface. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.